Hello guys, welcome to the concepts of medical. In this video we are going to talk about, this is actually the second video of about the skeleton and anatomy of skeleton. So this is actually in the first video we have covered the axial skeleton. We have just divided the skeleton in the two categories. Here in this chart we have just divided the skeleton in the two categories, that what is axial skeleton and what is appendicular skeletons. If you haven't watched this video, so go to the I button there and first watch this video, and then you have to watch the appendicular skeleton video. So today we will talk about the appendicular skeleton. So what is actually appendicular skeleton and what is its constitution, what is its constitute of, and what are how many bones do we have in the appendicular skeleton. We will discuss it in detail, right? So appendicular skeleton is actually consists of pectoral girdle, two things, right? Pectoral girdle and pelvic girdle, right? And with the pectoral girdle we have upper extremities or upper limb, and with the pelvic girdle we have lower extremities or lower limbs. So we will cover all these terms, right? So first we will just cover the pectoral girdles, that what is the pectoral girdles and how many bones do we have in the pectoral girdle. Girdles, what is girdle? Girdle is actually a site to which our extremities or limbs attach to. So within the pectoral girdles we have actually two bones. The first bone here we have is the clavicle, and the second bone we have here is the scapula. So to one side or to one limb we have one clavicle and one scapula. So for the both sides we have two scapula and two clavicle and two scapula, right? So this was all about the pectoral girdle. So now what is upper limbs and how many bones do we have in the upper limbs, right? So now we will talk about the upper limbs, that how many bones do we have in the upper limbs. So upper limbs and actually consist of the first bone here we have is the humerus. Humerus is actually one in number for one side but two for both the upper limbs, right? So this is actually two in number. And the second bone here we have is the radius. Radius is actually the lateral bone up, and this is also two in number. And the third bone here we have is the ulna. This is actually the medial bone up or forearm, and this is also two in number. And the fourth we have carpals. Carpals are actually 8 in number. These are actually present here. These are actually radius bone led to the lateral side, and this is ulna bone. Ulna bone is here present to the medial side, and here we have 8 bones between metacarpals and radius and ulna. So what are their names? I'll write them here, right? So we have, how many bones do we have? Carpals 8 bone, right? So the first bone here we have is the scaphoid. Scaphoid. And the second is lunate. The third is triquetrum. The fourth one we have is physiform, and the third one we have is trapezoid, and the next one is trapezium, and I'll make another videos as well about the mnemonics and all the bones, that how to memorize them by mnemonics and by fingertips. So I'll, and my next video will all about its mnemonics, that how to memorize it very fast, right? So trapezium, and the next one is capitate, and the last one is hamat. So these are actually 8 in number. So the next we have, the fifth one we have is actually metacarpals. Metacarpals are actually 5 in numbers. These are actually metacarpals, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So these are actually metacarpal bones. And the last one we have is phalanges. Phalanges are actually 14 in number, right? These are actually phalanges, right? These are actually phalanges bone. These are actually 14 in number, because three phalanges are present in these four finger, and in the thumb we have only two uh, phalanges bone, right? So how many bones do we have studied in the pectoral girdle or upper extremities, right? So we have just studied two clavicles, two scapula, and two humerus, 2 radius, 2 ulna, and 8 carpals, 5 metacarpals, and 14 phalanges. So how many bones it becomes? I'll add them by calculator so that there should be no any confusion. So 2 we have clavicles, 2 scapula, and 2 humerus, 2 radius, 2 ulna, and 8 carpals. So 8 carpals are actually for one bone. So for 2 we have how many carpals are actually, so we have 16 carpals, right? So for one, this is actually for one, so I'll collectively, for two hands we have 16 carpals, and 5 metacarpals per one hand. So for both hands we will have 8 metacarpal, right? So 10 metacarpals, right? So 16 plus 10, and 14 phalanges are actually for one hand. So for both hand we have how many phalanges? 28. So 10 plus 28, it becomes 64. So in upper pectoral girdles and upper limbs, actually we have 60 bones we have in upper limbs, right? In pectoral girdles we have 4 bones, right? So how many bones do we have collectively in pectoral girdle and upper limbs? We have collectively 64 bones in upper limb, right? And now we will talk about the pelvic girdles, that how many bones do we have in the pelvic girdles and what are their names, and how many bones do we have in the lower limbs. So here we have is the pelvic girdle, right? So pelvic girdle is actually consists of uh, pelvic bone, which is made up of pelvic bone are actually two bones to both sides, two bones, but each pelvic bone is made up of three bones. How many bones? Three bones. What is pubic bone? And they are just fused together and make one pelvic bone, right? And another is ilium, and the third one is ischial bone. This is also called iliac bone, right? So how many bones do we have in the pelvic? In the pelvic we have two bones, pelvic girdles. We have two bones named as pelvic bones, but each pelvic bone is made up of three bones. So we can also say that pelvic girdle is actually consists of either two bones or either six bones, right? So that's how the count the numbers of bones are coming different in the calculations. For one time we have just conclude all the bones as 217, and another and next we just calculate them all as 206. So that is the difference here, and the difference were in the vertebral column, right? So you have to keep these points in your mind, right? So the next point we have here is the lower limb. So how many bones do we have in lower limbs, right? So lower limbs are actually also the first bone here we have is the femur. Femur is actually 2 in number for both the legs, and the second bone is tibia. Tibia is actually lateral bone of our legs, and it is also 2 in number. The third one is fibula, which is actually the medial bone, and that is also 2 in number. The fourth one we have is patella. Patella are actually present over the knee joint, so these are also 2 in number. And the next we have 5 is tarsal. So tarsals are actually 5 in number, for 8 in number. Carpals we have 8 in number for one hand, but tarsal we have 7 in number for one foot, and 14 in number for both the foot, right? And next we have metatarsal. Metatarsals are actually 5 for one foot, but 10 for both the foot. And the last one we have is the phalanges. So phalanges are actually 14 for one and 28 for both the hand, for both the foot, right? For both the feet. So I'll just add them here again. That how many bones do we have in the appendicular skeletons and the pelvic means the lower limbs. First we have two bones in the pelvic bones and two femur, two tibia and two fibula, two patella, 14 tarsals, 10 metatarsal, and 28 phalanges. So it will come 62. So how many bones do we have in the, so here it all becomes how many bones? It becomes 62 in number. So here in the pelvic pectoral girdles, how many bones do we have? 4 here and 60 here, which collectively become 64. And in pelvic girdle we have either 2 or either 6, so I'll add 2 first. And in lower limbs we have how many limbs? If I 62, so in lower limbs we have just 60 bones, so it either become 62, but if I just add them as 6, so then how many bone will it become? 66, right? So in limbs how many bones do we have? In limbs we have either 64, in upper limbs we have all 64 bones, and in lower limbs we have either 62 bones if we just consider this pelvic bone as a 2 bones, but if we consider this pelvic bone as 6 bones, then we have 62 bones, 66 bones in the lower limbs. So 64 plus 62 we have 126. And in axial skeletons we have how many bones in axial skeleton? I have told you that in axial skeletons we have 80 bones, so it becomes 206. So I'll add them. The appendicular skeletons. So in appendicular skeletons, how many bones do we have? So I'll add first. I'll add 64 plus 62, 126. Right. So it will either 126 or it will become either 64 plus 66, 130. Right. So how many bones do we have in appendicular skeletons? Either 126 or 130. So I'll write them here. How many? 126 or 130. So now if I add 126 with, when I consider the pelvic bone as 2 bones and I consider the vertebral column bone as 26 bones, then I'll add 126 and 80, so it will become how? 206. But if I consider the vertebral column bone as 33 and the pelvic bone as 6, then it will become 217. So 87 plus 130, then it will become 270. So I'll just add them here, that how many bones do we have? Either 206 or 217. So these were all about the bones of our body, all bones of our body, that what are their names and how to memorize this and how we divide them. Appendicular skeletons and axial skeletons, and then appendicular skeleton we divide pectoral girdle, upper limbs, pelvic girdles, and lower limbs. So this was all about all bones of our body, and next videos I'll make about the their calculations and their names. I'll make a chart, and I'll make a big chart about all these names, so that it will make only one chart, right? So this was all about the bones, and if you want these hands out and pictures, you can visit my Instagram and Facebook page. The link is in the description.